All right, I'm going to try to keep this professional, but no promises because I hate Islamic State, and I'm really not happy with how Russia is handling this most recent attack in Moscow. So the issue here is that Islamic State is a problem for just about everyone all around the world. To solve this issue, to solve the issue that is the Islamic State, we have to be able to come together and combat them with some sort of unified effort. And we have in the past. It's a common enemy for the United States, for Russia, for Iran, and others. Those are major U.S. adversaries, but for the most part, we've been able to fight side by side against Islamic State in places like Iraq and Syria and elsewhere around the world. So it's incredibly frustrating when Islamic State claims responsibility for this tragic attack in Moscow. And rather than mobilizing resources to go after ISLs around the world, Russia points the finger at places like Ukraine, the United States, Israel, and others. Look, this is something we have to work together on. Islamic State, they hate everyone, including you, probably, and me. If you're watching this video, we'll pull up some demographics from the channel here to confirm. If you're watching this video, they probably hate you. Just sorry to break it. That's just the nature of that organization. Looking at this, the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Germany. Yeah, Islamic State doesn't like you. Odds are they would try to kill you given the opportunity. 95% male for channel viewership. Is that higher or lower than expected? I can't tell exactly what information I need to take away from that data point. But all right, to give a little background here as to this attack and why it took place and kind of flesh out some of these talking points that I've heard about why this isn't Islamic State or why it's suspect, we're going to get into a lot of that here. So starting with a statement from Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the previous head of Islamic State, who ran and hid from Delta and Rangers who were hunting him in Syria in 2019. So after a career of sending young men, impressionable youths, to their deaths, taking on much better equipped forces around the world, especially across the Middle East, when Baghdadi faced that exact same threat, he decided to cower in a tunnel and detonate a suicide vest. And he didn't even take Americans with him. Instead, when he blew himself up, he killed 2 of his own children, wounded 2 Delta operators and a working dog. Just real solid guy. Overall, real role model. But looking at an article here recently put together that dives into a lot of this, titled Moscow Attack Signals Broadening Footprint of ISKP's Central Asia Contingent. This was written by Lucas Weber, Peter Smith, and Colin Clark. Great resource. I'll link it in the description below. They say that Baghdadi wanted to hit Russia. One of the major leaders of Islamic State in the last 10 years talked about a desire to want to strike Russia. This is nothing new. In their article, they say, quote, the hostility toward an intent to strike Russia also exists, as it was named a top enemy of the Islamic State in 2014, when then Caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi asserting that the movement's foes are, quote, being led by America and Russia and being mobilized by the Jews, end quote. The military intervention to prop up Bashar al-Assad, close relations with Iran, and Russian mercenaries sharing a battle space with Lebanese Hezbollah in Syria positions Moscow as the vanguard of Shia interests. Wagner Group activities across Africa and the Sahel have further drawn the ire of Islamic State. So Russia, again, main target of Islamic State. It's nothing new. Since for a long, long time, Islamic State, the jihadi organizations entirely, have wanted to and have successfully targeted Russia. So Islamic State, Khorasan Province, the group based out of mostly Afghanistan at this point and a little bit of Tajikistan, more on that in a second. The fact that they would strike Russia is no surprise, especially to folks following terrorism in the terrorism space. They've been keeping an eye on this for a long time and have expected it for at least 10 years. Now, I think one of the reasons this Moscow attack is getting a lot of attention and is confusing in a sense is because we haven't seen a lot of these large-scale terrorist attacks in recent years. And the reason for that is because they're being stopped. Intelligence gathering is stopping these. Police actions are stopping these before they're taking place. So according to this article by Weber, Smith, and Clark, they say there have been 21 plots, Islamic State plots, disrupted in 9 countries since last March, which is more than the 8 last year, and the only 3 that were recorded between 2018 and 2022. So the attempted attacks are increasing significantly. And it's not crazy to believe that as the attempts increase, every so often one of those is going to get through. And when we look at the attack in Moscow specifically, this was not a complex attack. It was catastrophic and tragic, and a lot of innocent lives were lost. But if you look at what was done there, they had incendiary grenades, which was a little unique. But for the most part, they carried rifles into a soft target, a concert hall that doesn't appear to have been guarded at all with any sort of military or police presence, which is not unusual. It was a soft target. They opened fire and they were able to kill a lot of people and then get away. That type of target exists all around the world. It's not an overly complex type of attack. Now, when looking at the Islamic State Khorasan province specifically, the authors here say that branch has successfully struck inside of Iran, the Maldives, possibly Turkey and Tajikistan, and now, likely, Russia. In addition, they've plotted against states such as India, Iran, Germany, Austria, the Maldives, Qatar, Turkey, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia. So this group specifically, ISKP, Islamic State Khorasan province, the affiliate based out of this broader Afghanistan, Tajikistan region, they are really trying to make a name for themselves as a group that has the capabilities and desire to strike outside of their home base, if you will. And this is so frustrating in a lot of ways because you've probably seen this in the news. There were a lot of warnings issued to Russia in the lead up to this attack. And one of the reasons this is so frustrating, this loss of innocent life to this terrorist organization, is that the signs were there to intercept this. Russia, it looks like, could have taken steps to prevent this from happening. They were on the trail of Islamic State. I mean, on March 3rd, just a couple weeks before this attack, the FSB reported killing 6 Islamic State militants in the Muslim majority republic of Ingushetia, which I probably mispronounced. I'll put it up on the screen here so you can see it. And this concert hall attack took place just 2 weeks after the announcement on Russian state media of a raid on Islamic State cell in the city of Kaluga, southwest of Moscow, that was allegedly preparing to attack a synagogue in Moscow. So in the weeks leading up to this attack, Russia was already intercepting Islamic State cells trying to carry out attacks in the country, right? So Russia knows this is a threat. They are intercepting and stopping attacks from taking place in their country already, actively, within weeks of this attack taking place. And then that same day, on March 7th, the U.S. Embassy in Russia issued a warning of imminent plans for Islamic State or a terrorist organization to target large gatherings in Moscow and asked its citizens to stay away from large gatherings of people, including concerts. And it wasn't just the United States. Similar warnings came from Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Germany, and the United Kingdom. All issued terrorist warnings to their citizens in Russia in this same period of time. It should not have been any shock that this was in the cards. Right? Now, the United States and Germany, United Kingdom, Latvia, they didn't say on this date at this location, this is the specific target. I don't know the details of the intelligence that was shared there, but Russia, it should have been in the cards. They should have seen that this was a possibility. They were just a few days ago thwarting major Islamic State attacks. Now, after this very short manhunt, I guess technically it's still ongoing, but in the immediate aftermath of this attack, it looks like Russia rounded up at least a handful of these suspects. I think I've seen everywhere from 11 to 14 total that have been apprehended. Straight up torture right out the gate. So you can see that most of these guys have been pretty heavily abused when they're shown at their first hearing in front of a judge. One of them, there was a video of the police officer, if you will, cutting off his ear and trying to feed it to him. Seriously, on video, send out to the public as look what we did. This is great. And some of these guys, you see them when they show up in front of the judge, they have plastic bags down around their neck, which looks an awful lot like that was being held over their face to suffocate them in some way of torture. I don't know. We didn't see that. It looks like that kind of stuff is happening. Islamic State even issued some threats saying if you continue to harm our people, we will continue to carry out attacks inside of Russia. Now, through these confessions, coerced confessions in all likelihood, these people have all pled guilty, said they did take part in some way, shape, or form in this attack. And it looks like most, if not all, are Tajiks, hailing from Tajikistan, which I've seen some confusion there. Hey, Tajikistan is not Islamic State. When people think Islamic State, they think Iraq and Syria. That's it. Well, there's branches of Islamic State all around the world. And if you look at the group that claimed responsibility for this one, Islamic State Khorasan Province, where is Khorasan Province? It encapsulates a handful or a portion of a couple different countries. One of those countries is Tajikistan. So ISKP has been heavily recruiting from inside of Central Asia, including from Tajikistan. Because again, Tajikistan in the Islamic State view is a part of Khorasan Province, who make up a relatively small, the Tajiks do, but increasingly active part of ISKP's external operations, which leads us into this other aspect here of people saying, hey, this isn't actually Islamic State. These were not Islamic State militants, which I think there's some confusion here that these guys somehow go to like a terrorist academy and then they graduate and they get their diploma and they're card-carrying members of Islamic State and they have that card on them just in case they get questioned or caught somewhere. They can pull it out and say, ha, told you, I am Islamic State, just like I said, which makes no sense, right? These are terrorist organizations. They don't want to be known for their affiliations with these entities until they carry out their operations. So the idea that they're carrying around some sort of identification that would tie them to the group would make it very hard to conduct their operations around the world, which gets into this conversation of when you're looking at how these groups carry out attacks, they've evolved over the years, right? Are they executing the attacks directly? Are they facilitating the attacks? Or are they influencing the attacks that take place? And, when you look back to the 9/11 attacks, kind of the most notable in recent history, those were executed by Al-Qaeda militants, right? Those were guys who trained in Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, some, if not all of them, right? So there were direct links from those hijackers to the people inside of Afghanistan with Al-Qaeda. So that was easy. So what we've done in recent years is, as we've adapted, the terrorist organizations have adapted, we are really clamping down around the world on people coming out of Syria, Western Iraq, and portions of Africa with a heavy Islamic State presence. They can't easily travel around the world into countries that could be targeted, right? There's a heavy watch on them, if you will. We don't want that same thing to happen. If you're coming from an area controlled by Islamic State, there's going to be a lot of eyes on you, and you might not be able to get into the country you're trying to target. That leads into the second aspect, which is a little bit easier for these organizations, the facilitation of attacks. So maybe they can't necessarily get their trained fighters from, say, Syria or Afghanistan into the target country to carry out the attack, but maybe they can provide money. Maybe they can provide connections inside of the country, connections that they made online, to help the attack take place. Maybe in that sense, Islamic State, ISKP, or any one of these branches is to a degree calling the shots and saying when and where the attack will take place, but they don't have their people, necessarily traveling from the mountains of Afghanistan into Moscow to conduct the attack, because that is challenging, right? It's a lot harder to do that than the last aspect here, which we're seeing a lot of recently, the influence of attacks and kind of coercing people online, inspiring, if you will. And this is the easiest of all, right? Think about how simple this is. ISKP, Islamic State in general, puts out a ton of propaganda. ISKP has propaganda that goes out online in a multitude of languages, including English, Russian, and quite a few others. So what they're trying to do is to get people to look at that and say, well, I agree with what I'm hearing there. And then in the context of this propaganda, it's not just sending religious messages. They're calling for their followers, their believers, to carry out attacks around the world. That's an Islamic State-inspired attack. So how do you tell the difference here? When someone carries out an attack and after the fact says, I did this because of Islamic State, or they pledge bayah or allegiance to the emir or to the organization as a whole, is that Islamic State that did it? I guess technically they're not the ones that pulled the trigger. The person who pulled the trigger is responsible, but it's heavily influenced and inspired by Islamic State. That's what they're going for. It makes it a lot easier for Islamic State to carry out attacks like this and be behind attacks like this all around the world. And that's what we're still trying to fully understand with the attack in Moscow. Is it executed by guys who spent time in Islamic State training camps? Probably not. That's looking less likely. Was it facilitated? Possibly. There's some indications of that right now. And then you have the influence aspect of just people wanting to carry out this attack for ISKP for any number of reasons. Now, this also ties back in to the nature of where these guys are from. Tajikistan easily can move into Russia. So it's a lot harder, if you think about this, for a Syrian fighter from Islamic State to move into Russia. It's even hard. It's also hard for someone from Afghanistan or Pakistan to move into Russia to carry out these attacks. Pretty easy, all things considered, for someone from Tajikistan, compared to those other two, to move into Russia, likely a native Russian speaker, to be able to carry out these attacks and go relatively undetected in their target country. It makes sense that if they're not going to get someone that's actually living in Russia, Tajikistan is a pretty good option for ISKP to carry out attacks there. And then a little more specifically around this kind of ISKP Russian hatred, again, there's so many reasons why this group and Islamic State as a whole hates Russia and has wanted to attack them for a long time. Going back to the article from Weber, Smith, and Clark, they say ISKP has been particularly vocal about Moscow's strengthening relations with the Taliban and carried out a suicide bombing against the Russian embassy in Afghanistan in September 2022. Shortly after calling upon supporters to, quote, cast fear into the hearts of the sons of Putin and Russia and to, quote, kill them with cars and knives. So again, we're getting back into this inspiration of attacks from ISKP. They're carrying out the attacks where they have the personnel and the equipment available inside of Afghanistan against the Russian embassy, and then they're calling on anyone who has the means. In this case, you got a car, you got a knife, go out there and kill Putin's sons, kill Russians inside of Russia. So again, I wanted to just kind of step back a little bit, provide some more context around this overall attack. It's frustrating. It's awful that innocent lives were lost, that a terrorist attack was permitted to take place. And I say permitted because it doesn't look like the appropriate steps were taken by Russia to stop this when a lot of the signs were there. And it's going to be a rallying cry for Islamic State. They're going to be able to point to this for quite a while as a recruiting tool. Look what we're able to do. Look at how strong we are. And when Russia then takes that information and points at places like Ukraine or the United States, Israel, elsewhere as kind of this vast conspiracy, instead of the group that hates them, has continually carried out attacks against Russia, is bragging about it and wants to do more, I think it limits our ability. Again, because this is a global threat. The United States alone cannot eliminate Islamic State. The United States and Iran and Russia all together cannot eliminate Islamic State. It's going to take a significant effort. So Russia is, all things considered, a major partner in this global war on terror, especially when it comes to IS and ISKP. When they start veering off and deciding that other things are the priority and blaming these attacks on groups that are not responsible or at this point don't appear to be responsible in any way, I think it limits our ability to effectively counter Islamic State, which is very much still a significant threat today and makes you wonder where the next attack they carry out is going to be. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, linked in the description below. We talk about a lot of these subjects: terrorism, national security, China, Russia, Mexico, the cartels down there, Pakistan, and more. Putting out 3 articles a week, free. You can sign up, get them direct to your inbox. Hope they're useful. I think they're pretty interesting topics and things that aren't getting a lot of coverage in traditional media. Again, I'll link those in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.